Jazz here from Aussie RC Playground, and today we're going to be talking about this guy. This is the Harrier S1100. Now, I picked this one up from Banggood probably about 6 months ago now, or thereabouts. It sat in a box for a couple of months before I actually had the courage to put it together, mainly because, and I'll show you the box here very quickly, this is the box that it came in. Not a very flattering or inspiring box, just a cardboard box. And inside that, there was basically just a pile of foam. You had to cut away a lot of the bits of foam and you have to basically glue everything. There's really nothing that's designed to click together or screw together as such, except for some ESC covers, which we'll talk about a bit later on. Anyway, the good thing is this wing is actually a very good foam. I do like the finish on the foam is actually very good, although it's got a lot of dimples in it and things like that. But aside from that, once it's all finished, it's actually really stiff. It's a very, very good solid wing. They give you a couple of different canopies at the front here. So this is the plain sort of version one. And then you've got one where you can put like a GoPro mount. The GoPro mount's not included, I'll put that on there. You have to glue all these bolts here into place and everything. So you actually have to do quite a bit of work. They give you a spare nose cone here, which looks a little bit different from this one. They give you a spare set of props. I ended up with some spare hardware, some spare screws and things like that, and of course you got some spare cables and stuff that I didn't end up using on here, mainly because I had to do my own wiring for this thing. So let's talk about this wing a little bit, because there's actually quite a lot to get through, and then we'll get some flight footage at the end of the video. Now I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as I can, because there's a lot to cover here. So let's talk about the overall build process of this. This is not a beginner build by any stretch of the imagination. This is an expert build. You definitely need to know what you're doing. As I said, you've got to do some custom work to this. You've got to do some wiring, some soldering, and of course you've got to prepare everything for gluing, all your surfaces, all of this stuff that's under here. There's a lot of little bits and pieces that you need to glue up, and you got to make sure you know exactly what you're doing. With your main spar and everything, you got to kind of dummy fit everything before you actually install it and glue it up just to make sure it all fits. So definitely not a beginner's build. I'm sorry for those of you who are probably hoping to get something like this if this is your second plane or something like that, or your first plane. You definitely want to know what you're doing with this one. Now, as far as time to build this particular wing, it took me 3 nights to do it. Now, for some people that might seem like a lot. There's probably about 6 to 8 hours buried in time-wise into this wing. Some people might take a little bit less time than that. I took that long because I wanted to make sure that I did it right. And as I said, there's a bit of custom work involved. The wiring for this, because you're running twin ESCs, you have to kind of hook them up in parallel. So red wire needs to match with red wire on the other ESC, black wire with black wire, and then that kind of leads to the flight controller that's in here, and they plug in here into the flight controller. And then there's 2 additional wires that need to come off the flight controller with your desired connector. They do give you a couple of short length wires which are pretty useless. You don't want to use them anyway. I ended up just keeping them and leaving them alone. Yeah, you got to do your own wiring for this. Ideally, that's the best way to do it. The motor mounts are another thing that you need to customize. Initially in the packet, which I have here as spare, they've got some balsa motor mounts, and they've also got a bit of some carbon fiber motor mounts. Now, I saw a video from Andrew Newton, who's out in Geelong, and he modified the motor mounts, the mounting plates for the motors, where you can actually have access to the motors themselves. Because if you do it the way that they tell you, once you've glued the motors to the wing, you can't access those motors anymore. You have to rip them off the wing to undo the bolts that are behind. But if you do it this way, where you have the little cross motor mounts on here, they're mounted to some 3mm craftwood that I cut up and molded to shape so that they fit on there perfectly. And then I glued them in, I think with some Maraldite or something, just so that they don't come off, and they're nicely done there. So sand the surfaces down, chop it up with a knife or whatever. Make sure that the bond actually works as best as it possibly can to prevent the motor mounts from coming off. So you have to do those two modifications. The other one I did as well was mainly just for the Vtx antenna. I've got a little bit of balsa kind of, or not balsa, it's more like plywood underneath here where the antenna is mounted onto, so it's nice and sturdy. And then of course I glued that onto the wing itself, and then that runs onto my Vtx, which is here. And then the Vtx has got a JST plug, which is the, I'm using the Tramp HV, and I've got that piggybacked off the battery voltage here on the board with another JST. So if I'm running this in line of sight, I don't have to have my Vtx on. If I'm running FPV, just plug it in and away you go. So nice and simple. So that's the way that I've done that. The other thing to keep in mind is that you do need a fair amount of reflex on these elevons. I think somewhere around about the 10mm mark is how much reflex you need. Despite all of that, the wing is actually quite fast, and you can fly this wing on either a 3-cell or 4-cell. I find it to be plenty on 3-cell. I'm yet to fly it on 4-cell, but no doubt I'll do that soon because I just got myself a 3000 milliamp 4-cell for this particular wing. Battery sizes, I would recommend something along the 3000 to 5000 milliamp 3S, and probably, I don't know, 2.5 to maybe 4,500 milliamp 4S. You don't probably want to go too big on the 4-cell. You can fly 2200 4-cells in here, but I did find that to get the CG right, I needed some additional weight in the nose. And 2200 3-cells, well, you're probably going to need to run 2 of them in parallel. That's probably the only thing, because this does need a little bit of nose weight. In case you're wondering what camera I'm using a Foxy Falcor on the nose here. As I said, I'm using a Tramp HV, and of course I've got my receiver for my Tyrannus in here. Flight controller is not that hard to set up. Read the instructions very carefully. Both of your servos plug into the flight controller, and then you need 3 signal wires to come off the flight controller to your receiver. 2 are for the servos, 1 is for the mode. So that's just essentially how that's set up. So you only need the signal wires to go to the receiver. I've used plugs. You may use other means depending on the type of receiver that you're using, but essentially that's how that works. The speed controllers are a 30 amp speed controller, which are provided with the wing, and the motors are a 2205 2300 kV, which are essentially quad motors. They did give me some spare props in here as well in case those ones ever break, but so far so good. Everything's been pretty rosy. I'm pretty happy with the way that this wing actually flies. So I think I've covered pretty much everything that you need to know regarding this wing. It is a very laborious build. You do need to do some custom work to it. You need a heap of reflex on the elevons, and you do need to make sure you have a decent sized battery. Now, the battery compartment in here is actually quite enormous. So like I said, I was running a 5000 milliamp 3-cell, no problem, heaps of room, and it balances out quite nicely. Just make sure you glue down the battery tray properly, because initially I used a little bit of CA and that didn't hold very well at all. I think that lasted about 2 flights and it came off. So I've now got some Araldite on here, plenty of it in fact, and it seems to be working a lot better. So make sure, because of the foam being so well, smooth and nicely finished, make sure you rough up those surfaces before you glue any of this together. Use a bit of rough sandpaper. I sometimes use just my knife and just chopped up, the edges so that the glue can really get in underneath the foam and create a nice solid bond. And that's pretty much all you really need to know about this particular build. So I'm going to leave you now with some flight footage. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and as always, check out the video description down below where I'll have more links to the wing from the Banggood website where I got it from. I might even put some links in there to some of the batteries I was using, and there'll also be links in there to my social media pages such as Facebook, Instagram, and of course Patreon, if you of course want to jump on board and help out the channel. That is it from me. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll speak to you all next time. Coming by. Coming down. Throttle off. stabilizer off. Nice. This thing is not shy on power with the 3-cell. Middle rates and high rates. Oh yeah, high rates, good roll. Good roll on high rates. Nice.
When you watch it, like when they it's free, but there's no.
This thing flies so good. Flies so good. Alright, let's land it and do some FPV. Hang on, I did say land it, and it's taking its time. Nice, beautiful.